Okay, I just wanted to put together a real quick podcast to talk about the requirements for your proposal that will serve as the final project for 586. So I'm going to go through each one of these requirements briefly, and then this podcast and PowerPoint will be posted on PolyLearn so you can have these resources as you put together these proposals. To be clear, these are presentations that you're going to do in front of your peers and Dr. Wood and myself. Um, both participants need to be presenting information and material, and both participants need to be pulling together the materials and resources for this presentation. This is a group project, a joint project, and we need to see the manifestation of that in both of you presenting content during the proposal, and it's up to you guys to decide who presents what information. Um, Okay, so let's go through each one of these requirements. Requirement number one is pretty self-explanatory. You need to describe the student. You need to do so in a way that provides enough information that would allow replication, meaning it would allow someone to do a study with similar students, with students with similar characteristics. You can include information on their age and grade and demographic information. You can include information about their special education service category. You could provide relevant assessment results, and keep in mind that you might just want to provide assessment results that are relevant to the dependent variable. So if you're targeting social behavior, maybe talk about some assessment results that might have been conducted on their social competence or their language capabilities. If you're targeting an academic skill, maybe include some of the assessment data about that particular academic category. You can also include brief observations that you might find relevant to the description of the student. Use assignment number one as a good kind of guideline for this. There's also an example in the PowerPoint on PolyLearn in 532 that we went over in class that you can kind of use to guide you with the target student identification. So requirement one only needs to be about one slide of clear information on your target student, and it's worth 10 points. Requirement number two is worth 15 points, and it is identification of the dependent variable. This needs to include a clear operational definition of the behavior that you're going to target, including examples and non-examples where necessary. This needs to be of sufficient detail that someone could replicate a study on similar behaviors, and that your partner could collect inter-observer agreement with this definition of the target behavior. I know that some of you are considering using response classes of behavior, that is, behaviors that are similar, connected, similar behaviors, things like having a conversation or responding to a peer, in which waving might count, making an appropriate on-topic comment might count, saying hello might count. That's fine if you're going to use a response class of behaviors. Just make sure that you define specifically what behaviors would be considered within that response class. Okay, so requirement number two is that you provide a clear identification of your target behavior and a clear operational definition. Requirement number three is a consideration of the social importance of the dependent variable that you've selected. So this is where you're going to provide some rationale for addressing this target behavior. This is where you can use information that you collected in assignment three, assignment number two. You could talk about the pivotalness of the skill. How important is this skill across environments? How important is this skill to other connected skills? What would improvements in this skill do for the student and related stakeholders? I know that you've been collecting information from other stakeholders, the student, the teacher, and the families as you've gone through this process. You had some of them do some rating for you in that target behavior hierarchy sheet that you filled out. Consider including any of that information in there. We need to see in your consideration of the social importance of the dependent variable that you do have input from stakeholders, and that you have talked to the teacher and you have gotten input from the student and the family. So make sure that that information is present in requirement number 3. Okay, requirement number 4 is the identification of the independent variable. So what is the independent variable? What intervention are you using in this study? Clear description of the proposed IV and specific information on the IV components. I know that some of you have been talking about doing combined independent variables. That is, you've been thinking about using video modeling and peer-mediated interventions. Well, you need to include specific information on how your group's going to be organized, what type of video modeling are you going to use, that type of thing. You need to include information on assessing treatment fidelity. How are you going to make sure that the intervention is being implemented the same way each time? Okay, so that's requirement number 4, an identification of the independent variable. It's worth 15 points. Should be about 1 or 2 slides in length. Requirement number 5 is that you're including some rationale for why you chose that independent variable. And this is also worth 15 points. Important to include in this slide a summary of the literature that influenced the selection of your independent variable. Keep in mind that when you did the research synthesis for reading class, that's a great formula. You guys had to write some summary paragraphs. You could consider using a similar formula and just create a summary paragraph of the literature that influenced your selection of the independent variable. So we want you guys to be considering relevant literature when selecting these independent variables and not just doing something that you're interested in. So the research that you're looking at should be connected to student characteristics and should also be connected to dependent variables. So you need to be in the literature seeing if your dependent variable is talking out. You need to be in the literature looking at what are people using to target talking out for students with autism. It's okay to start broad and make that broad connection if you aren't finding literature that's really specific to student characteristics or dependent variable characteristics. But you need to have clear summaries of literature that influence your independent variable to get full credit under requirement 5. Okay, requirement number 6 is the identification of the measurement system for the dependent variable. That is your data collection system. Okay. This is worth 10 points and it's going to require you to provide a clear description of how you're collecting data on the dependent variable. Are you using partial interval recording? Are you using duration recording? Are you using event recording? What type of measurement system are you using? You can include examples of data sheets, including things like a proposed timeline for data collection. When are you going to start collecting baseline data? That type of information would be great. The other thing that you need to mention is that you're going to be collecting inter-observer agreement. There's a brief podcast on some rules for inter-observer agreement and treatment fidelity, so be sure to check that out. But you will need to include a statement about IOA and the frequency with which you're going to monitor inter-observer agreement. Requirement number 7 is that you identify a specific research question. Remember when we had you guys work on your specific research questions in class, and we had you use that specific formula. In order to get full credit on requirement number 7, you need to include a specific research statement following that formula. Okay? The last requirement is that you identify specific research design. We went over 3 research designs in class: the AB design, the AB design or the withdrawal design, and the multiple baseline design. We'll be covering additional, more complex research designs when we meet next. So maybe you're not quite ready to identify the design that you're going to use, and that's okay. But maybe you are, and maybe you have a clear idea of what that design is going to be. Either way, by the time these proposals roll around, you will need to include the single case research design that you're going to utilize. The minimum is an AB design. Okay, so just making sure that you realize that at minimum you have to have an AV design. Okay, so that's it. Those are the requirements for your single case research proposal that will serve as a final project for 586. Don't hesitate to send me an email if you have additional questions, and I hope you enjoy the Thanksgiving break.